Afternoon. What's going on out here?
Just catching some shade, officer.
Got a couple calls. Let me see some ID.
For sitting on a bench, I'm good right here.
Sir, don't make this harder than it has to be. Stand up for me.
Stand up for what?
Refusing a lawful order.
Lawful? Hold on. Special Agent Miles, FBI.
The November sun shone brightly over Desert Ridge Park in North Phoenix. Families laughed on the grass, joggers passed by in rhythm, and dogs chased frisbees with pure joy. But at a shaded picnic table near the center of the park, Darius Mitchell was just trying to eat chips and drink water in peace. He had chosen that quiet spot to recover from a morning workout, unaware that the ordinary moment he sought would soon explode into chaos. In his calm, relaxed state, he didn't notice the patrol car rolling slowly into the parking lot. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support ensures they reach the people who need to hear them. Darius was 38, a veteran FBI special agent assigned to the Civil Rights Division in Phoenix. He spent 15 years investigating unlawful arrests, unconstitutional stops, and police misconduct. His entire career was built on understanding exactly what officers could and could not do, particularly when race was involved. That day, he was off duty, unarmed, and completely free from any work obligations. His credentials and service weapons were locked safely in his car. He had no suspicion, no warrant, and no reason to fear anyone in the park. He was simply a man enjoying a public space. But Officer Travis Holloway didn't see a man enjoying a public space. Holloway had been with the Phoenix Police Department for 9 years and had accumulated 17 formal complaints, 13 of which involved stopping black individuals in parks or recreational areas for no legal reason. Each time, the department responded with training sessions rather than discipline. Holloway excelled at passing tests, signing certificates, and returning to patrol exactly as before, believing in his own authority and ignoring the rights of the people he stopped. Holloway spotted Darius immediately. In his mind, the scene confirmed years of assumptions. Black man alone in a park, doing nothing suspicious yet existing in public space. The call Holloway responded to had reported a suspicious person, but there was no description of criminal activity. No threat. No disturbance. Only someone uncomfortable with Darius's presence. Holloway didn't need a reason. He had 9 years of experience guiding his actions. Darius glanced up just as Holloway approached. He recognized the walk immediately. Holloway's stride carried a familiarity that Darius had seen countless times in his investigations. A walk of certainty, a body language of assumed guilt. There would be no friendly greeting, only an interrogation. Holloway stopped in front of him. "Hey man, what are you doing out here?" Holloway demanded, his tone sharp, clipped, and commanding. "Just relaxing in the shade," Darius replied evenly. He stayed seated, holding his chips, studying Holloway. He knew that any sudden movements or defensive gestures could escalate a situation needlessly. Holloway's eyes narrowed. "People called about you. Let me see some ID." Darius's jaw tightened. "I'm not giving ID for sitting in a park. There's no law requiring me to do that." "Then stand up. I'm going to cuff you." "Cuffing for what?" Darius asked, calm but firm. "I haven't committed any crime. You have no reasonable suspicion." Holloway's response was immediate, almost rehearsed. "You're refusing a lawful order." Darius recognized the pattern instantly. Holloway's insistence had nothing to do with law. It was about control, assumption, and bias. Without escalating further, Darius reached into his pocket and pulled out his FBI credentials. Holding them clearly where the patrol body camera could see, he said, "Lawful." "Nah, man. You picked the wrong guy. FBI. Special Agent Darius Mitchell, Civil Rights Division, Phoenix Field Office. And you just violated my Fourth Amendment rights on camera." Holloway blinked. Confusion, recognition, and fear passed across his face in quick succession. "You're FBI. 15 years. I build federal cases against officers who do exactly what you just did, Darius replied. His voice remained calm and professional, but each word was deliberate. This stop is unlawful, unconstitutional, and documented on your body camera. Threatening arrest without reasonable suspicion, demanding identification without cause, harassing someone based on their presence in a public space, that's a pattern. One you've repeated for 9 years. By now, another patrol car had arrived. Officer Rachel Kim stepped out and immediately assessed the situation. She had worked with Holloway before and knew his patterns. Seeing the FBI credentials and recognizing the potential disaster, she interjected firmly, "Sir, step back. This stop is not lawful." Darius didn't miss a beat. He calmly explained the situation to Kim, laying out the sequence of events, the lack of reasonable suspicion, and the unlawful demands made by Holloway. Kim nodded, understanding instantly. She knew the constitutional line had been crossed, and Holloway's past behavior ensured that this was more than a one-time incident. Within minutes, a supervisor arrived. Lieutenant Freeman had been reviewing Holloway's file for years, recommending termination multiple times, all ignored by higher-ups. He had seen all 17 complaints, the 13 that showed bias, and the 16 trainings Holloway had attended without changing his behavior. Watching the body camera footage of today's encounter confirmed what Freeman already knew. Holloway could not police without violating rights, and the department's repeated leniency had created a ticking time bomb. Badge, service weapon, body camera. You're suspended immediately pending termination, Freeman ordered, his voice cold and unyielding. Holloway tried to justify himself. I was responding to a call. You violated a federal agent's constitutional rights. You demanded identification without reasonable suspicion. You threatened arrest for asserting protected rights. This is your 17th complaint. 13 show the same pattern. 16 training programs didn't work. You're done, Freeman interrupted. Holloway's hands trembled as he handed over his badge and weapon, his 9-year career ending right there in the park. Darius collected his chips and water, calm but resolute. I've spent my career investigating cases exactly like this. Phoenix PD ignored clear evidence of bias and misconduct for years. This is $5,300,000 in federal liability. This isn't just about today. It's about systemic failure to act. By evening, the incident was all over law enforcement networks and media outlets. The Department of Justice opened an investigation, congressional oversight hearings were scheduled, and Phoenix PD faced scrutiny it had long avoided. Darius's lawsuit would ultimately expose an entire pattern of institutional negligence. Training used as a substitute for real consequences, documentation treated as accountability, and repeated misconduct left unchecked until it targeted someone who literally prosecuted civil rights violations professionally. What had started as a quiet afternoon in a park had transformed into a nationwide wake-up call. Darius had been in the wrong place only in the sense that Holloway's biases made anyone who looked like him automatically suspicious. But his professionalism, knowledge, and calm response turned a dangerous stop into undeniable evidence of systemic failure. The stakes were no longer individual, they were institutional. And this was only the beginning. The afternoon at Desert Ridge Park had seemed ordinary, peaceful even, until Darius Mitchell's simple act of sitting at a picnic table became a legal and institutional firestorm. Within moments of showing his FBI credentials, the incident escalated far beyond a routine police stop. What Holloway hadn't realized was that he had triggered the intersection of personal bias, federal authority, and documented misconduct, a combination that could not be ignored. Holloway stood frozen, his hands slightly shaking as he held his patrol radio, body camera still recording the entire encounter. He had never experienced anything like this. In his 9 years, he'd stopped dozens of black individuals in parks for loitering or suspicious behavior, but none had been a federal agent trained to scrutinize police conduct professionally. Darius didn't shout, didn't threaten. He calmly stated the facts, identified himself, and cited constitutional protections. Every word highlighted Holloway's unlawful conduct, and every gesture emphasized his authority. Officer Rachel Kim remained close, observing both men carefully. She was 12 years into her career, experienced, and not one to tolerate misconduct. Her voice cut through the tension sharply. "Agent Mitchell, I'm sorry this happened." "Officer Holloway, step back and remain silent until your supervisor arrives." Darius nodded, folding his chips neatly and placing them in the small bag he had brought. He had faced aggressive officers before, but this was different. He was no longer investigating from the outside. He was now the subject of the misconduct he spent years prosecuting. His mind raced, not with fear, but with the legal and institutional implications. Holloway's behavior had created undeniable evidence, a pattern of racial bias, disregard for constitutional limits, and an untrained arrogance enabled by years of department leniency. Within 15 minutes, Lieutenant Freeman arrived. He had been monitoring Holloway's history for years, having reviewed the 17 complaints that formed a damning pattern. 13 incidents of bias against black individuals in public recreational spaces, repeated failures to change behavior despite 16 separate training programs, and a persistent disregard for constitutional limitations. He watched the body camera footage in the patrol car, noting Holloway's aggressive approach and Darius's calm but pointed responses. Freeman's eyes hardened as he approached. He spoke with absolute authority. "Badge, weapon, body camera. You are suspended immediately pending termination proceedings." Holloway's voice cracked. "Lieutenant, I was just responding to a suspicious person call." "You violated federal law. You threatened a federal agent. You have 17 complaints, 13 showing bias. 16 training sessions didn't work. You are finished," Freeman said. The words left no room for argument. Holloway complied, handing over his badge and gun, shaking visibly as the implications hit him. His 9-year career, built on repeated misjudgments and bias, ended in a public park in front of witnesses and cameras. Meanwhile, Darius stayed calm. He had experienced the frustration of seeing officers repeatedly escape consequences, but this time, accountability was immediate. "Lieutenant," he said, "Phoenix PD ignored patterns for 9 years. This isn't just about today. It's about systemic failure. Training certificates don't equal change. Documentation without discipline doesn't prevent misconduct. This is federal-level exposure waiting to happen." By evening, the incident had exploded across media channels. The story of a black FBI agent stopped for eating chips while off-duty in a public park circulated widely, highlighting both the officer's bias and the department's failure to act on documented misconduct. News anchors replayed portions of Holloway's body camera footage, and headlines emphasized the irony: an agent who prosecutes civil rights violations being subjected to the very violations he investigates. The Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division immediately opened an investigation into the Phoenix Police Department's pattern and practice of discriminatory stops. Congressional representatives scheduled oversight hearings. Other federal agencies began reviewing their collaborations with Phoenix PD. Darius Mitchell had become the focal point of an institutional reckoning that extended far beyond one officer or one park stop. Holloway's personnel file became central evidence. It contained 17 complaints, with 13 displaying identical racial profiling patterns and certificates from 16 different training programs addressing implicit bias, constitutional policing, and community engagement. Despite repeated warnings, Holloway's behavior had not changed. Every training session had been documented as completed, every test passed, but nothing had prevented further violations. Now, the consequences were unavoidable. Darius and his legal team filed a federal lawsuit 90 days after the incident. The complaint named Holloway, his direct supervisors, and the Phoenix Police Department itself. Allegations included violations of the 4th and 14th Amendments, racial profiling, unlawful demands for identification, threats of false arrest, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and deliberate indifference to a known pattern of misconduct. Each section of the complaint relied on irrefutable evidence: Holloway's body camera footage, Darius's credentials, and the department's own records documenting repeated complaints. The lawsuit framed the issue as systemic, not anecdotal. The department's tolerance for repeated misconduct, the repeated reliance on training instead of meaningful discipline, and the failure to terminate Holloway despite years of evidence became the crux of the case. Even the legal strategy was precise. Darius's attorneys highlighted the monetary and reputational risk the city incurred by ignoring patterns of unconstitutional behavior. They emphasized that Phoenix's failure to act created liability that could not be defended in federal court. The argument was straightforward: allow repeated violations unchecked, and the cost becomes both financial and institutional. Throughout the process, Darius remained composed. He had spent years gathering evidence against officers like Holloway, compiling federal cases that demonstrated repeated misconduct. Now he experienced firsthand the frustration of being targeted for simply existing in a public space. He treated each interaction with the press and officials with care, emphasizing the systemic nature of the problem, the department's repeated failures, and the broader implications for civil rights. Weeks later, Holloway was officially terminated. The letter outlined his racial profiling, unlawful threats, and repeated failure to correct behavior despite 16 trainings. The National Decertification Index included his name, ensuring he could never serve in law enforcement again. His career, 9 years in the making, ended permanently, not because of one stop, but because the system finally applied the consequences it had ignored for nearly a decade. The Phoenix City Council convened hearings to examine police accountability. Darius testified publicly, emphasizing how training without consequences is ineffective. He described, in detail, the 17 complaints, the 13 incidents of bias, and the 16 trainings that had failed to produce change. His testimony was direct and clear. Accountability requires more than paperwork. Without meaningful consequences, misconduct will continue unchecked. By this point, the public's attention had shifted from a single officer's behavior to a citywide conversation on systemic police reform. Social media discussions debated why officers could attend 16 training programs without altering behavior, why repeated complaints didn't trigger automatic termination, and how federal oversight could prevent similar incidents in the future. Darius became a symbol of both the vulnerability and power of individuals within systems. Vulnerable because any black individual could face the same unjust scrutiny. Powerful because his knowledge, credentials, and composure transformed a routine park visit into undeniable evidence of systemic failure. His presence, authority, and professionalism turned what could have been a personal violation into a catalyst for institutional reform. And as the investigation and lawsuit progressed, the stakes only grew. Phoenix PD faced exposure on multiple levels: financial liability, reputational damage, federal oversight, and legislative scrutiny. Darius's $5,300,000 settlement was the first tangible acknowledgement of the city's failure to act. But more importantly, it was proof that ignoring repeated misconduct has consequences far beyond individual officers. It affects entire departments and the communities they are sworn to protect. This incident, born from a simple act of eating chips in a park, highlighted the fragility of civil rights protections when bias goes unchecked. It revealed the limitations of training as a corrective tool and exposed the systemic flaws in how complaints are managed. Holloway's 9-year career ended because the system finally enforced accountability, but Darius Mitchell's experience was a reminder of how close individuals can come to injustice when institutions fail to act. The legal and public battle that followed Darius Mitchell's encounter at Desert Ridge Park unfolded like a meticulously scripted courtroom drama, but it was all painfully real. Phoenix Police Department had mismanaged Officer Travis Holloway's career for nearly a decade, ignoring 17 formal complaints, 13 of which reflected a clear pattern of racial bias, and relying on 16 training sessions as a substitute for meaningful accountability. Now the city faced the consequences, not just financially, but institutionally, morally, and politically. Darius sat in his office at the FBI field office, reviewing documents and emails from his legal team. Settlement discussions were underway, and his focus was razor sharp. This wasn't just about compensation. This was about proving that when a department repeatedly ignores patterns of unconstitutional behavior, the system itself is responsible for the resulting harm. Darius knew that each document he submitted, every motion filed, and every argument presented in court would have to withstand intense scrutiny, because Phoenix PD would fight to minimize liability. His phone buzzed with a text from his attorney. Settlement offer on the table. $5,300,000. They're acknowledging liability. Take it or fight. Your call. Darius exhaled slowly. He had anticipated a settlement eventually, but seeing the number was surreal. This was the largest payout in Phoenix history for a park stop. Not because of a single act, but because of years of institutional negligence, the repeated failure to discipline Holloway, and the unmistakable evidence that the department's so-called training programs had failed to curb misconduct. He thought back to that November afternoon. Holloway's approach, the immediate demand for identification, the threat of handcuffs. All of it captured on body camera, all of it clear in the law. Darius had remained calm, professional, and factual, and it had paid off. But he also remembered the countless individuals who were not federal agents, not armed with knowledge or credentials, who faced similar stops and intimidation without recourse. That reality was what drove him forward. Meanwhile, Phoenix PT had begun internal reviews. Lieutenant Freeman and other supervisors faced questions. Why had repeated recommendations for termination been ignored? Why had a pattern of 13 biased stops gone unaddressed despite documentation and training? City council hearings demanded answers. Public scrutiny intensified, and the media spotlighted the department's systemic failure. During one of the hearings, Darius gave testimony that would later be cited in multiple federal reports. He spoke slowly, deliberately, ensuring that every detail was clear. I am an FBI special agent in the Civil Rights Division. For 15 years, I have investigated police misconduct, unconstitutional stops, and racial profiling. On November 25th, I experienced firsthand the very violations I spent my career documenting. Officer Holloway demanded identification without reasonable suspicion, threatened to arrest me for asserting my Fourth Amendment rights, and acted in accordance with a documented pattern of bias spanning 9 years. This department ignored 17 complaints, sent Holloway to 16 separate training programs, and failed to implement meaningful consequences. This settlement is not just about me. It is about holding a department accountable for repeated, documented failures that violate the rights of the community they claim to serve. The words resonated beyond the room. Social media users shared clips of his testimony. Legal analysts praised the clarity of his argument. Community activists highlighted the systemic implications. Every word underscored the fact that unchecked bias in policing had measurable, serious consequences. Holloway, meanwhile, was left to face the aftermath of his actions. The termination letter outlined his repeated failures and the legal ramifications of stopping a federal agent unlawfully. The National Decertification Index recorded his permanent inability to serve in law enforcement. He could no longer rely on police work to build his career. He did not appeal, did not release statements, and offered no apology to Darius or the public. The system finally imposed consequences, but it had taken 17 complaints and nearly a decade to do so. The settlement funds, $5,300,000, were significant, but Darius knew money alone could never restore the dignity stolen from those subjected to unconstitutional stops. What it did achieve was accountability. Phoenix PD acknowledged the risk of systemic liability, and the settlement sent a clear signal. Repeated misconduct without consequences carries tangible costs. 8 months after the settlement, Phoenix implemented comprehensive policy reforms. Automatic termination consideration was triggered when 10 complaints of similar nature appeared within 5 years. Training effectiveness was no longer measured solely by attendance and certificates, but by demonstrated behavior changes in real policing scenarios. Mandatory civil rights attorney review was required for all cases involving complaint patterns. Body cameras were mandated for interactions in parks and public recreational facilities, and annual independent bias audits were instituted with public reporting. These reforms were a direct result of Darius Mitchell's case, ensuring that the city took active measures to prevent similar patterns of misconduct in the future. Darius continued his career with the FBI, but the incident remained a defining moment. It highlighted both vulnerability and power. Vulnerability, because any black person could face harassment for merely existing in public space. Power, because knowledge, authority, and composure could turn a personal violation into institutional reform. He frequently spoke at conferences, city council meetings, and law enforcement seminars, emphasizing the need for accountability, not just training. His message was clear. Documentation without discipline is meaningless. Certificates without behavioral change are meaningless. Misconduct left unchecked will inevitably harm someone. The national conversation shifted. Stories of racial profiling, unlawful stops, and training programs being used as accountability substitutes were shared widely. Other departments began auditing their own practices, fearing similar liability if patterns were ignored. Police unions and professional associations had to reassess how complaints, repeated patterns, and training effectiveness were handled. And yet, Darius never lost sight of the human aspect. He understood that his experience was unique. He had credentials, knowledge, and a federal agency backing him. Most people subjected to similar stops do not. The system had failed them repeatedly. This understanding fueled his work in training other officers, consulting with departments, and advocating for reforms. He made clear that reforms were not about punishing individuals alone. They were about protecting the rights of entire communities. Months later, in a quiet moment at another park, Darius reflected on that day. He sat at a different picnic table, still enjoying chips and water, still dressed casually. This time, he felt a sense of closure. Holloway was no longer a threat. Phoenix had paid a historic settlement. Policies had been implemented to prevent recurrence. And most importantly, the case had sent a message. Violations of constitutional rights have consequences. Yet, he knew vigilance was required. Systems can revert to old habits. Departments may return to paperwork over action, training over accountability. But the Darius Mitchell case stood as precedent.